Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 13th Salem Lit Fest. I'm Carolyn McGuire, a member of the wonderful team of Salem Athenaeum staff and volunteers who put on the festival each year. I'm very pleased to introduce this session, Addressing Racial Tension in Historical Fiction. Before I introduce our authors, I want to give you a quick overview of how this will work. We've pasted our anti-harassment policy at the top of the chat. We don't anticipate any problems, but we also want you to know how important it is for us that everyone feels safe. Most of you are Zoom experts by this point, so just a quick reminder to put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer them after our authors have finished their conversation. If you'd like to use closed captioning, just click the box at the bottom of your screen that says CC. And now to introduce our guests. Jabari Asim is the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and a Pushcart Prize. His work has been included in the Best American Poetry and Best American Essays. He is the author of 8 books for adults, the most recent of which, Yonder, is a novel that the New York Times called spare, gripping, and beautifully rendered. His 13 books for children include Preaching to the Chickens, Me and Muhammad Ali, and A Child's Introduction to Jazz. He is a professor at Emerson College, where he directs the MFA program in creative writing. Lisa Braxton, our moderator today, is the author of the novel, The Talking Drum, winner of a 2021 Independent Publisher Award, Gold Medal, overall winner of Shelf Unbound Book Review's 2020 Independently Published Book Award, winner of a 2020 Outstanding Literary Award from the National Association of Black Journalists, and a finalist for the International Book Awards. She is also an Emmy-nominated former television journalist, an essayist, a short story writer, and a writing instructor. She is also president of the Greater Boston section of the National Council of Negro Women, whose mission is to lead, empower, and advocate for women of African descent, their families, and communities. She lives in the Boston area. And finally, a native of the Republic of Congo, Emmanuel Dongala, attended college in the US, where he earned a BA and an MA before going to France for his PhD in organic chemistry. He returned to Congo to teach until 1998, when he was forced to leave due to civil war. His friend, the writer Philip Roth, helped him move to the United States, where he taught at Bard College until his retirement in 2014. Now an American citizen, Dongala writes in French and has published a collection of short stories, a play, and 6 novels. His books have been translated into a dozen languages. Dongala received a Guggenheim Fellowship and was awarded the Fanlon Nichols Prize by the African Literature Association for excellence in creative writing for human rights and freedom of expression. His novel, Johnny Mad Dog, was made into a film in 2006. His latest, The Bridge Tower Sonata, was translated into English in 2021. Welcome, Jabari, Lisa, and Emmanuel. I'm really looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you
for that lovely introduction of all 3 of us. And I just wanted to say as we begin that when I found out that I would be moderating this panel, and it was mentioned that Jabari Asim was one of the speakers, I looked up his bio and I said, oh, wait a minute, way back in the day before I started writing short stories and wanting to become a novelist and I wanted to write some fiction, I had gotten a copy of A Taste of Honey from the library. And I said to my husband, this is a template for how to write about your past, about your history, about your family in the South. And I went and bought a copy of the book, which I have in my bookcase back there. And so I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to actually talk to the person who wrote this book that just really made the path for me to begin to write some short stories. So I'm just thrilled to meet both of you. And as we begin, we are in that virtual age where we have all these different virtual backgrounds, but Jabari, I have never seen a background like that. And at first I thought it was just, oh, he's just showing some best-selling books. But yes, he's showing some best-selling books that are his books. They're all his books back there. maybe I'll do one too, but mine will be with my one book. My one, I'll just do mine over and over and over again.
It's supposed to be subliminal, just kind of put the idea in your head.
It's just an incentive for me to get rolling with more novels. So beginning, I wanted to ask Jabari this question to begin. There have been many books written about enslaved Africans over the years, so many novels, nonfiction. The story's been told over and over many different times, many different ways. What are you saying, and how are you saying it that's different, Jabari, from what's been said already about Africans being brought here and forced to be slaves?
Well, I think every fictional treatment of that experience has been different. I don't think any of them have been the same. So when people say, this is a subject matter that we've addressed, actually, we've only begun to scratch the surface. There should be a story for each person, each individual, each family on both sides of the Atlantic that have been impacted by the experience. And so I was partly provoked by an essay I read once by an African-American novelist who said, let's not do any more novels about the era of enslavement. That story has been told. And the minute someone tells you you shouldn't do something, I want to do it. So I said, let me take a look at this subject matter and see if there is a way that I can put my own spin on it. And one of the things that interests me is the clash of stories. And much of what we get about this period is told by the colonizers, by the enslavers. And so I'm very interested in presenting a different point of view from people who are on the other side of that transaction. And that's what I set out to do in Yonder.
And Emmanuel, I feel that American audiences, at least American audiences, that's all I know from my background, have not read that much about 18th century African descendants. And you have woven a story that I was amazed by, because you have the natural tensions that people have in their lives. You have the father-son tension. You have the colorism tension of father and son, where the father knows, he realizes that to open the doors for his virtuoso son, who's an excellent violinist, to get into the world of Haydn and Mozart and all of those people, he has to have his son as the passport, because the son is light-skinned. He's as you say in the novel, mulatto. And you've woven all this. And I've been to Paris a couple of times, but you just made Paris come alive for me in a way I have never seen before. How do you juggle all these things in one novel? The race, father-son relationship, the setting in the 18th century, all that history, the deep, exquisite history that you described. How do you do that as a writer, to bring all that together?
Yeah. Before I answer, is that all my novels so far, I've been writing about Africa, about the problem of independence, colonialism, corruption, the corrupted head of state and the dire station in which Africa is. And then I said to myself, well, I've written about these things, and I would like to do something new, something different, which is not very well known. And then I thought, and I said, I will take up this challenge to write about a period I don't know anything about, 18th century Europe, England, classical music. And I was fortunate enough to I was listening to radio one day and classical music, and they were playing the Kreutzer Sonata, and the speaker just said, well, actually the Kreutzer Sonata wasn't written for Rudolf Kreutzer, but it was written by a Black musician, friend of Beethoven, but completely forgotten today. And then he went on, he played, and then that's it. I became very, very curious about that. And once I got the idea in my mind, I kept thinking how to do it. And I was very lucky, because when I saw the story and then said, okay, the angle I'm going to tackle that is this, because many of the novels written about Africans in Europe, usually it's of the slave story, but people forgot, I realized doing my research, that in 18th century Europe, actually, there was an elite of Black people in Europe, very well integrated, who were moving in all these high aristocratic circles and all that. And but yet up to a certain level, because there is this glass ceiling, they say, is there. So that was my story. How this integrated elite, very well known, especially on the French side. You will see that they are completely different toward the Black in France and the Black in England. They completely different mindset, but I'll come back to that later.
Now, was it tough to research this, Emmanuel,
Yes.
because it's been so not talked about, not written about much, or how tough was it? What were the challenges of researching this?
Well, it is a challenge because, first of all my books were about Africa, which I know very well, but I did not know at all that period in Europe. I knew a little bit about the French Revolution because we were French colonized in the culture. But about England, the so-called Anglo-Saxon word, I didn't know much. And so I did lots of research. It took me lots of years. And I have to research for history of that period. And then what made it fascinating, because it was a period where Europe was changing with all these people, but at the same time, Europe was changing, all this enlightenment and all that, and the science coming, and then Europe was becoming Europe with all the people traveling around. And then these elite people, African, most of them were coming from the the island, but most of them, all this elite was what they call then mulatto. We call it mixed race today. And as we'll see in the book, most of them, the father were white, the mother were Black. So you couldn't say that it was a love story, but the only one which was in that fascinating story, the father is white and the father is Black, the mother is white, is the Bridge Tower. And the story's Bridge Tower is fascinating. And this what led me into all this, to see how these people navigate to survive. And I talk back later the difference between those in France and those in England.
Okay. And Jabari, you described the violence against enslaved Africans. Some of it is gruesome, the kind of violence that could make a reader put the book down and take a breath and then come back to it later, which is what I had to do at some parts. So what techniques did you use as a writer, as an author, with all these horrific things, these inhumanities against the enslaved Africans, and balance that in a way that people would keep reading? What techniques did you use to make that continue to be the narrative drive to keep people reading?
Sure. I mean, that is one of the challenges. You want to tell the stories accurately as you can. At the same time, you don't want to so repulse readers that they drop the book and run screaming from the room. But you have an obligation to be honest and to be true. So I had a lot of conversations with my editor about that, how much to include. And in an earlier draft, there was more. And then we decided to try a draft where there was less. And then my editor came back and said, maybe we should put a little more back in. So we did, so it was a struggle to try to find the right amount. It helped that my editor is an African-American woman, brilliant African-American woman who had edited several books that covered this period of history. So she had the background to help walk me through that. And I will say that even though it is a work of fiction, every instance of brutality in the book is based on an actual instance of brutality that actually happened in history. So it was my job as a storyteller to render that in a fashion that's engaging, keeps the narrative moving, holds the reader's attention, but at the same time honors that historical record. So a lot of revision, a lot of conversations with my editor about, well, what about this scene here? Is this too much? And then at the same time, I'm thinking, yeah, it may be difficult for me to read or to write, but I'm really thinking about the people who actually lived through it, right? Who could not edit their experiences, right? So I'm operating from a position of privilege to begin with. So I wanted to be respectful of that legacy, but also the emphasis really isn't on their suffering, it's on their transcending their suffering, on their overcoming their circumstances, because if they had not, Lisa, you and I would not be here and we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? So we are evidence of their triumph. And I wanted to make sure that that point was made.
That's so true. And also the title of your book, Yonder, which I understand it indicates that getting beyond what's yonder, being able to envision getting beyond being enslaved and what you can get to when you get to the other side. Is that accurate, would you say?
Yeah, yonder takes on several meanings, the word throughout the course of the novel. And I originally sort of arrived at it because I like the way it sounds, right? As much as the meaning, I like the word yonder. And so in many respects, it's a philosophical novel, which is one of the things I wanted to show, that these are people who, despite their circumstances, thought deeply about the cosmos, about the planet, about their role, their destiny, etc. And yonder is the word that embodied those discussions for me. Also, the people on the plantation most of them had never been off the plantation. So they have all these speculations about what the world is like beyond the gates, right? So they have those conversations. What do you think is yonder? And for other characters, it's how do we get yonder? Whatever's there, that's where we want to be, as opposed to here, right? So yonder has multiple meanings and performs multiple functions in the novel.
And as I was reading it, I kept thinking about this gospel hymn that we've sung at my Baptist church. We're going up yonder to be with our Lord. And I wondered, did slaves sing that, or did that come from, was that inspired by that? I wonder.
Yeah, and I don't address that song directly in the book, but I'm glad you mentioned it because it's absolutely one of the songs that I was thinking of. But it evolves from this coded language that enslaved Africans used, right? Which is what I tried to dramatize in the book. They had a language that they used among themselves. They had a language that they used with their captors, with the people who stole them. And so going up yonder in the context of a spiritual, of a song by the enslaved, to their captors, it meant they were talking about the afterlife. They were talking about paradise. They were talking about heaven. But to many of these enslaved people, it just meant going north. I'm preparing to leave. I'm going to flee. Are you coming with me? Right? So yeah, so there's that double meaning.
Emmanuel, I was interested in how your character, Frederick, tries to dress to fit in. He wears all this elaborate clothing. He wants to fit in with the Parisians, and he wears this turban, which to me means that no one gets to see his coarse hair. And I was struck by the idea that when I was reading both of your novels and with Emmanuel, so much of the time when I was reading, I felt like they were talking about contemporary issues. They're talking about, it's relatable to now how we, as I have get chemicals put in my hair to straighten my hair, how we try to fit in with the dominant culture. Were you thinking about that as you were writing, that you were trying to send a message to your readers about that we do?
Well, not really. Afterward, I find out that yes, it's the same problem as today. But in those days, when they are minorities, they have to navigate their society in order to fit in. So they have to dress there are two solutions. Or they have to dress like the people, to be invisible, to take the codes, etc. And that's what Frederick was trying to have his son be, like them, dressed like them, etc. But he was so different. He was such an outlier. He was real black, from Africa. So the only thing where he can be distinguished is to be really different. And those times in Europe, there were other things they would call the exotism,
Exoticism?
exotic, Orientalism. You know, they were fascinated with all these Turkish things, etc. So that's why he dressed like that, pretending that he was an African prince from Abyssinia, etc. And that's how he got his respect. So it's just many strategies to fit in that society.
Okay. And Jabari, I was thinking about your character, Cannonball Green, the slaveholder, and he has his enslaved Africans sliding boulders and stones into a pit. Then they have to use their axes and hammers to grind the rocks. All the while, he's taking notes, thinking he's doing some great kind of experiment about how these Africans, how strong they are. I'm not sure what he's trying to do. He's a crackpot, obviously, and other things as well. The Tuskegee experiment kept going through my mind as I'm reading this. Was that something you were trying to remind people of?
A little bit, but more so, I was really addressing Thomas Jefferson's book, Notes on the State of Virginia. And it's a book he wrote in which he supposedly based it on his scientific observations of enslaved Africans. And many of the lies that he perpetuated as a result of his studies became the governing customs and thoughts, and certainly the most influential book about Africans in America for the next 100 years. And among the things he claimed was Africans do not feel physical pain like white people do, right? And I mean, you can get this book from any bookstore. It's a Penguin classic. It's called Notes on the State of Virginia by Thomas Jefferson. But if you see modern studies today, you will find that Africans, African Americans, anybody from the African diaspora, when they seek medical care in the United States, they're far less likely to receive the pain medication that they need, because the medical establishment has never been unpersuaded of this idea that we don't feel physical pain in the same way. It also enabled slaveholders to rationalize torturing and physically punishing their captives, because pain is not the same to them. Another thing that Thomas Jefferson argued was Black people did not have genuine emotional attachments between family members. Therefore, it was okay to break up their families, sell away their children and their loved ones, because he said emotional pain is, quote, less felt and sooner forgotten among Black people. So it can be rationalized away. So this whole idea of pseudoscience, of racist science as a tradition that was perpetuated by Thomas Jefferson, who was the American symbol of the Enlightenment during this period. The damage that it did and continues to do. So that character, Cannonball Green, was sort of inspired by Thomas Jefferson's malicious foolishness.
So what you're saying here is that centuries later, we are still suffering the effects of what Thomas Jefferson thought.
Very much. Emmanuel was about to say something.
Yeah, to speak on Jefferson, it's amazing because that's when I joined Jabari, because Jefferson appears in the book. He was a symbol in my book. In the symbol Enlightenment, he was in Europe, very well respected. But then, in Europe, as I said, he was, with Sally Hemings, with the mistress.
Yes.
So he appeared as a character in the book, and I reminded all that what he thought about Black people, that he wrote about them, etc. And then when he wrote that all men are born free, etc., but for him, men weren't Black. There were no Black. He were considered among that. So it's funny that
the overlap there. Yes, yes.
Yeah, what also crossed my mind, Jabari, as I was reading about the boulders they had to crack and all that stuff, was some people look at American sports that way. I mean, you watch a game, you have these mostly white audiences who are watching the Black basketball players and the football players, and they're cracking each other's heads in with their helmets, etc.
And the tennis players.
Okay. So I felt that. I feel that that also harkens to our current times with the whole sports scene. Would you say that as well?
Yeah, no, I think you're right, because I do have a few instances in which Cannonball Green talks about using his stronger captives to fight for money, and their captors collect the money. So yeah, that's an early version of prize fighting, which is documented, but also in having the enslaved people spend a lot of time breaking big rocks into little rocks. I was trying to symbolize the system of incarceration that succeeded slavery, convict leasing in the South, rounding up Black men and charging them with vagrancy and loitering so that they could be coerced into continuing to perform the labor that they were once forced to do. So, so it's addressing that as well.
Pretty much kidnapping and lynching. That's
Yeah.
what we're talking about.
Mhm.
Emmanuel, earlier you mentioned you wanted to talk about the differences between France and England when it comes to the reception of Africans and mulattoes during that era.
I have to tell some of these people I'm talking about are very famous. You know, you have Alexandre Dumas, the father or the author of the Three Musketeers. You have a Chevalier de Saint George. He was a friend of Marie Antoinette. They played music together, so really high into society. And in Vienna, you have one called Soliman. He was a friend of Haydn and Mozart. They were in the same Masonic lodge. And he was a friend of the emperor and all that. However, those people had limited, Saint George couldn't be named director of the Paris Opera because the cabal of divas, they couldn't be take orders for Black. And you had Soliman when he died. These people were very famous. His body was stuffed and put into a museum. And so those are, and the General Alexandre Dumas, the father of the writer, Napoleon Bonaparte, when he became emperor, hated him because when they went to an expedition in Egypt led by Bonaparte, the Arab took Alexandre Dumas at the head because he was tall and beautiful, and Napoleon was this short little guy. People said no, so he kept a grudge to him and all that. So anyway, just to tell you that those people were very famous. Now, but the characteristic of those people the elite in France is that they really wanted to be French, to fit in. So they didn't have any literature of protest, etc. On the contrary, in England, you have the Black people who were in those elite were, most of them, if not all of them, were abolitionists. If you take one guy named Ignatius Sancho, he was a friend of Lawrence Sterne, and those who know interest in English literature, is the author of Tristram Shandy. He was a friend of him, but he wrote a biography which was very successful and very big abolitionist. Another one, Olaudah Equiano, also was very famous, strong abolitionist, so strong anti-colonial literature, which you do not find in the French part of those elites. So to summarize, the French, the Black people who were in French society tend to integrate, to forget where they come from, to become really French, while those in England, after manifested themselves, fought against slavery, wrote pamphlets, etc. So for me, that's the main difference. As a matter of fact, in the book at the end, you will see that the transformation of Frederick, the father of
George,
was transformed at that and became also fighting against slavery.
And one thing I thought, Jabari, was that about the difficulty or how painful it was to read about the atrocities I thought that you also wove in some humor, and I thought that was helpful to kind of balance things out in a way that made it more digestible. So you have this character who is not a first person character, not a point of view character, named Screech Owl. And Screech Owl, just the name Screech Owl, had me laughing my head off. Tell me about Screech Owl and why she's called Screech Owl, what that means for the enslaved Africans to use terms like that.
Sure. Well, I mean, a couple of things. The story is told via multiple narrators. All of those narrators are members of the captive population. There are other sections of the book that have no narrator at all because they are addressing the lives of the thieves, of the people who stole them. And a lot of stories about this period, there's this tension where the enslaved people said, this is what's going on. And then the people who enslaved them said, actually, let me tell you what really happened. And that becomes the dominant discourse, say like in public school education, for example. The point of view tends to be the point of view of the colonizers, of the thieves, of the people who stole other human beings and brutalized them. So in the book, I never wanted to give any of the captors or enslavers the opportunity to say, this is what happened. This is our version of the story. Their version of the story does not exist in Yonder. And in many instances, neither does their voices. And so Screech Owl, for the most part, is a silent character, as Black characters often are in white stories. We're present but silent. And I kind of wanted to explore that from a frankly Black point of view. What would it be like to have a character, a white character, who is present but silent and doesn't get to interrupt the narrative and say, this is what really happened?
And you were using some words there. Words seem to be dominant, very important in your book. In fact, before the book begins, I'm not sure if it's called a preface, but you talk about language. You talk about the 7 words that are whispered to the baby when the baby's born. And you refer to these characters as colonizers and thieves. I've never heard those terms used before when it comes to slaveholders and the enslaved. You must have been very careful about that. And why did you use those terms?
It was very deliberate. I mean, I wanted to emphasize the criminal enterprise at the heart of enslavement, right? And so I thought it was important to call a spade, call a thief a thief. And so that's that language. And then in the preface, I talk about how all of the enslaved people have 2 tongues, right? It's the coded language. And that's still true today. We have language that we use when we're just talking to each other that we will not use when talking to others, right? And that's a form of resistance. So I'm looking at language as a form of resistance. How can we protect ourselves? How can we share critical information without other people knowing what we are doing? I mean, you mentioned that with the song Going Up Yonder. It just seems like we're singing about heaven, but you and I are making plans. We're making plans to leave, right? And so, you talked about humor. Laughter is a form of resistance too, right? So I wanted to look at the different ways that our ancestors were always pushing back against the people who held them in captivity and worked consistently to dehumanize them.
Emmanuel, you said that you spent years doing research on this book. What surprised you in your research? Did anything come out that you were just surprised to learn about?
Yes, lots of things. First of all, the book is centered around music, and one of the most famous Beethoven sonata, piano sonata and violin, is called the Kreutzer Sonata. Everybody say Kreutzer Sonata. They forgot that it was written by Beethoven. He was 32 or so. For this Black musician was prodigy, and his name is completely written out of history. Nobody knows about that. So this surprised me, and also what surprised me is how so many Black were in those societies and really did participate. For example, General Alexandre Dumas, I mentioned the father of the writer who wrote the Two Musketeers. He was a general They went. He fought in Egypt with Bonaparte. He came back. He led revolutionary troops. I mean, it's just amazing. By the way, there's a book came out about him. I think 3 or 4 years ago, who got the Pulitzer Prize. The name is, I think, the Black Count or something like that. So these are fascinating characters. And also, what surprised me is how the way those people dealt with racism, the way to navigate through that. I mean, I can find the same thing today. And also,
Give an example. Give an example. You find the same thing today, how they navigate through racism.
well, for instance, people do not, between us, Black people, this colorism thing, people do not know how much to deal with it, and sometimes they don't assume that they are Black. You know, they have to to kind of I don't know how to explain that. And you have also these two tendencies. On the one side, those people who said, this is what we are fighting for the rights, we are doing this and that, we stand for it. And there are some people said, well, you know, you can't always complain, you know, be satisfied with what you get, because your father, your ancestors were in a worse state, you know. And we found that today. And same thing in Africa. You have a lot of leaders who are really sold into the Western countries. They think they put all the money in Europe. So many of the things, I find them that recurrent today.
And I understand you wrote the book in French, correct?
Yeah, I write in French. Yeah, I come from a French colony.
And it was translated into English.
Yeah.
Are you satisfied when you have it translated, and do the racial themes you want to get across translate properly for you?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm satisfied because, you know, process along we were discussing and writing, there were some, sometimes there was some misunderstanding, but yes, in general, whole, I'm satisfied with this one. Some of my books, I wasn't very satisfied with the translations, but this one is pretty good.
Because I've never really talked with an author who has had their work translated. How do you do that? Do you work closely with the translator and say yes, no, edit? How does that happen?
Well, it depends. When this book had been translated in where was it, in Slovenia? No, what language was that? Hungary. They're interested because one of the, you know, in Hungary, I didn't have a say. I don't have, you know, I don't know the language. When my other book was translated in Hebrew, I didn't have a say. But in English, since I know the language, then we had close collaboration. Yeah, it depends on which language. Yeah.
Right. And Jabari, you have all of your characters. You alternate points of view with your characters. I counted 5 different characters, and you hear from 5 different characters what they think. Why did you do that? Why not use the third person to talk about, have the characters as a third person character? You didn't do that. Why was that?
That's a great question. But first, I want to give a shout out to the question you just asked, Emmanuel, because I was thinking the same thing. I was wondering how that process worked for him, and so it was really illuminating to hear how that worked. But so originally, so as you mentioned, there are like 5 narrators. One of them is named William. Initially, when I set out to write the book, William told the whole story. That was my plan, right? But again, other characters would say, well, you know, that's how William saw things. I saw things differently. Let me tell you how it happened for me, right? And so I decided to listen to those other voices. And as I said, I'm fascinated with competing versions of the same story. And I don't think these characters' versions compete. I think they complement. right? But still, I thought it would be fun as a writer to do it that way, and more of a challenge too. How can I make this a challenge for me? I instead of William saying, and then Margaret did this and Margaret did that, which he does say about his partner Margaret, but then Margaret turns around and says, "Well, let me tell you what I was thinking or what I was doing in that particular situation." So it wasn't what I set out to do, and it just kind of began to take that shape of the various narrators speaking.
And there's a character, I think his name is Guinea Jack. Is it Guinea Jack?
Yes.
That William talks to quite a bit. That's his advisor, basically. I would say his spiritual advisor.
Sure.
And as I read, I found out that he was literally his spiritual advisor. Many different
Don't
ways.
say too much. Don't say too much.
I won't say that. I won't say anything else about that. But that was an element, a craft element of surprise. Let's just say a surprise.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to compliment you and congratulate you on that, because
thanks.
I was reading, it's like, whoa, this is not what I was. I will say I can relate with a certain family member who seems to be able to tap into people who advise him.
Yes.
You know, who I've not met.
We all know people like that, right?
Yeah, so, I'll just say it that way.
Yeah.
But that was pretty crafty, very clever.
Thank you.
Emmanuel, you have done so much research, and you've discovered so many threads about that part of history in Europe. And I can't help but think that you probably have come across some of these people, real life people like in your book, and you're saying to yourself, I want to explore that person's life. Are there other characters, other themes, other topics for your next books that deal with people who lived in that era, people of color from that era?
Well, not back to that era, because it took me too much time, too much research, because I didn't know anything at all about that era. So I think my next writing I'll come back to contemporary Africa, contemporary Africa. But I learned a lot, how the world works, how people, especially today, with these lots of migrations, coming from Africa toward Europe and all this suffering and all that. So the story of migration to Europe hasn't ended yet. As a matter of fact, the whole world is moving these days. Even the United States, you see people coming from the South, Latin America coming in and all that. So so this is maybe part of the story I may explore in my next writing.
Okay. And Jabari, what was your goal with this book? Do you want to entertain people? Do you want to educate them? What do you want them to come away with?
I want to hold their attention. It's got to be entertaining first with fiction. Nonfiction, sometimes you can just say, I'm just going to educate and take that chance. But with fiction, it's got to keep moving. You got to encourage readers, encouraging them an impulse to turn the page and see what happens next. So I wanted to spin a good yarn. I wanted to tell a compelling story more than anything else.
And also, same question for you, Emmanuel. Did you want to educate people, entertain, or a combination of the two, or something different?
Yeah, a combination of the two. Actually, first of all, I want to write a good story, good story. However, it's a good story, so you can read it. If you don't want to learn anything about it, but enjoy it, okay, go ahead. However, if you really want to learn something about it, yeah, I put in something. So there are two goals. If you put upfront to your reader that, okay, I'm going to teach you something, read this book, etc., I think it's going to but you say I'm telling a good story, well written, etc. But however, with all this background, with this thing which you reveal things they know, but they didn't realize it, when they read it, they think, oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, yeah. So, and then if you can reveal that to somebody, something he knows, but he thinks he didn't know, that's a joy for a writer.
And I wanted to say that I really enjoyed how you brought to life people I've heard of, people who've composed music I've heard. Yeah, you mentioned Beethoven, Haydn, Alexander Dumas. I've heard of him and his son, and you brought them to life. Was that challenging to bring them to life? Did you just use your imagination, or did you read up on all those people?
Yeah, it was really challenging. Especially, I have to confess, I didn't know anything of classical music. My thing is jazz, blues, and all the, Afrobeat, etc. So I have to plunge into classical music to talk about, the friendship between Beethoven and this guy. It was just fantastic. People do not know much about it. So yes, I forgot your question, but
How did you have to really connect the dots and use your imagination to
yes.
life?
Yeah. I have the best story that this guy was prodigy, good friend of Beethoven. They drank together, etc., and then they split up because of a dispute with the woman. That's all the
Right.
story. And it's
Right.
true, they disputed, and I found out that the woman they had disputed is a woman for whom Beethoven wrote the famous Moonlight Sonata. Yeah, and Bridge thought that she was not, and they broke up. They never spoke to each other again. It's such a stupid thing.
What
And
did he say? What did Bridge Tower say about the woman?
well, Beethoven wasn't very beautiful. He was people think he had some black blood because he was swarthy and all that.
Yes.
And he kept falling in love every time, and nobody liked him. So he was infatuated with that woman.
Mhm.
And Beach Tower said, "No, JK, she's not straight. Look at her. She's kind of playing you around, And he got mad and it never spoke again. However, it leads to the sonnet, to the Bridge Tower Sonata. So this is what I think is fascinating. Sometimes between a very short encounter, they can bring enduring work, And I always refer to, for instance, if you take Picasso, his meeting with African art lasted about, in a long period, maybe 4 years, but came out, the Demoiselle d'Avignon, which is based about African mask, etc. So sometimes history is really fascinating. Sometimes just a brief encounter can lead to a masterpiece which lasts forever.
Interesting. Jabari, what's next on your plate?
Well, children's books. I have a children's book coming out in October called Me and Muhammad Ali, about a little boy's encounter with Muhammad Ali. And then in December, I have a book called Child's Introduction to Jazz, which is a follow-up to my book, Child's Introduction to African American History.
Nice, very nice. I see Carolyn, you're back with us.
I am. We're just about out of time. I hate for the conversation to end. And I think the audience was pretty rapt as well because there were no questions because we just enjoyed hearing everything you had to say.
That's one way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I mean, I did. I don't know. Yeah, because you talked about so much more, and it's true what you were saying about a good story can also teach you as well. And that was one of my takeaways from all three of your books was that they were all beautifully written, and I felt like I learned so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm going to wrap up if that's all right. I want to thank you all for joining us. And next up at 11 o'clock, we have 2 sessions for you to choose from. Screaming, Crying, Throwing Up, YA Romance with Alex Astor, Jenna Evans Welch, and Kristen Dwyer, or World Building in Science Fiction with Ken Liu and Adrian Tchaikovsky. So more worlds to choose from. Thank you to the Salem Athenaeum and to all our sponsors, and especially our audience and authors. If you're inclined, you can purchase our authors' books at our sponsor, Wicked Good Books here in Salem, Copper Dog Books in Beverly, or from your local bookseller. Our festival's free for everyone each year and possible due to your support. If you'd like to donate to the festival, visit salemlitfest.org and click donate. And you can also find the rest of our schedule and authors on that site as well. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Giovanni. Meeting you.
Good to
I'm going
connect.
to read your book. The
Same
one
here. Gotta read Lisa
that you
too.
talked
Thank you,
about.
Lisa.
Yes, thank you. The Talking
Thank you.
Drum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks both.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye.